Hello, everybody. Thank you. My name is Garth Materi. I host the program Blue Sky on CBC Radio 1 in Saskatchewan, a daily current affairs and phone-in program. And certainly water is a current affair that we will all be paying more attention to as time goes by. I know it's hard today. It's supposed to be the first day of spring, and most of us right now, if we're thinking about water, are thinking where it's all going to go when it melts. But it's a much bigger issue than what we have going on locally. 1992, the United Nations General Assembly designated March 22nd as World Water Day. Quite a bit going on in water research here at the University of Saskatchewan. In fact, there are more than 70 researchers across this campus whose main focus is water. They include 5 Canada Research Chairs and an NSERC Industrial Research Chair, all involved in wide-ranging discussions and studies of water use and quality. And I'd urge you to take in some of the other lectures that will happen over the noon hour all week as the university celebrates Water Week. Before I introduce our speaker today, I would like to point out that some of these beautiful images you've been seeing on the screen behind me, some of these water-related paintings, are selected from the university's art collection, Water in All Its Different Manifestations and Diverse Settings, a theme that runs through Saskatchewan art. Special thanks to Kent Archer, the director and curator at the university's art collection and galleries, for putting these together for us. Now, our speaker today is really no stranger to the University of Saskatchewan, although I think, Allan, like some of us, you get lost when you come to the campus, so much has changed. Allan did his bachelor's degree in English here at the University of Saskatchewan before moving on to do a master's degree in journalism, and I tease Allan, he's now crossed over to the dark side. But the first lecture in our series today is Allan Casey's presentation entitled Synchronized Swimming, How Citizens, Scientists, and Other Species Can Work Together for Water Right Now. Again, Allan works as a freelance journalist, and he won the inaugural Science Journalist Award from the University of British Columbia and was the recipient of the prestigious Governor General's Award for Nonfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker today. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing lunch hour with us. Thanks for celebrating World Water Day. I got a new water bottle to celebrate that tomorrow. There's a lot of things going on to celebrate water in the next 7 days. There's World Water Day tomorrow, Water Week here on campus. Water Week is echoing across Canada. People are having events all over the place. Canada's defined by water, right? And I think we're just starting to really wake up to what we have. World Water Week is an example of that. So I think, like the Buddhists say, we're waking up to what we've got. So a little toast to water before we start. May everyone get their share. I talked about this being the beginning of a 7-day process, but it's also the beginning of a 7-year process that all of us here in this community are about to take together. Garth mentioned that there's, I think the number's up to 70 now. 70 researchers on campus are taking part in this new push for water research at the University of Saskatchewan. As you all know, it's become a big priority here. There's $30 million in funding. Maybe that number is going up as we speak. I don't know, but that's a nice number. $30 million from the federal government, 30 from the provincial government. 10 from the feds, and 10 from the province, and 10 from us right here in this community, in this university. So, lovely. That's a great start. I've got it on pretty good authority that that's the single largest endowment for water research anywhere on the planet right now. Wonderful. So with all this money and talent over the next 7 years, what are we going to do? We're going to do all sorts of things. We're going to reassess our relationship with water, if I can put it that way. We're going to start in our own backyard here in Western Canada. We're going to look at the Saskatchewan River, the South Saskatchewan in particular. We're going to look at the Athabasca watershed. We're going to look at the oil sands and reevaluate the impact of that. A long list of things. Those are just some of the highlights. And then we're not going to stick in our own backyard. We're going to take what we learn and share it with the world. Research, of course, is published, but we're also going to have we're also going to create something called the Global Institute for Water Security. So in some ways, that's probably the crowning achievement to all the stuff that's going to go on over the next 7 years. So you've noticed that I've been saying we and us all along, as if I'm sort of in charge of something or going to be out there sampling or participating in this research. So I have to confess, as Garth said, I've got an English degree from this university a long time ago, in the days before there was Starbucks in the library, and it was sometime in the last century. I've only taken, I'd have to look at my transcript, but I think I've only taken one science course, and it was a biology course. And it was one of those first year, those kind of courses that you can't use as a prerequisite for anything else, so for dummies, basically. There's a lot of girls in that class, I remember. It was a summer session, and we went to Boundary Bog, and not much science got done there either. I took a math course as well, and that's the only university course that I've ever failed. So not much in the way of science credentials. So I'm basically just a guy who lives down 9th Street, not too far from the river. I've spent my whole life in the arms of the South Saskatchewan watershed, I guess you could say. Eventually, they'll probably stick me in the ground not too far from the river. That'll be a long time in the future. But while I'm here, I want to do, as a citizen, I want to do everything that I can do to make sure that my grandchildren and everybody else's grandchildren experience the river in as good a shape as I knew it in, or better. That would be even more preferable, or better, because there's lots of things we could do to improve. So, as I said, not much of a science resume, so what's a guy like me with these non-credentials doing in Convocation Hall with a lot of brilliant water scientists in the room? I guess if working on Lakeland has taught me one thing, it's that people with humble credentials like mine and maybe some of yours, that we're really vital to stewardship, and we're vital to science. We can have the best science in the world and the best funding, and it so happens we have those things right here, right now. That's wonderful, but without the partnership of regular citizens, then we can't really get to our goal of water security, of sustainability, call it what you will. I call it just saving the biosphere. I see that as our great task right now as a species. So I know, having met lots of scientists, that they would gladly try to save the biosphere for us. I think they try to do that, a lot of them, every day, but they can't do it on their own. We've got to translate good science into good stewardship, into laws and policies that make sense, and that's really the tricky part. And you need a whole community for that. And at the base of the community, the base of the pyramid, is just people that care passionately about nature, about the environment, about water in this case. So community is a word that we use a lot. I think we understand it less well than our parents did. We don't depend on each other nearly as much as people used to. When in their day, my parents used to have a lot of parties, and that was their way of building community. I think my dad's in the background of this picture. They have a lot of pictures like this. And that was their way of doing activism. That was their way of bringing people together in the days before Facebook. They were in every kind of social group and club. They were out doing something every night of the week. And it was their way of putting interesting people together. Because, we're basically a tribal species, right? We tend to emphasize our differences and our disagreements. And in my experience, and I think in my parents' experience, you sit down in a room together and you really start talking to each other and you go, oh, actually, we're on the same team here. We have a lot of the same values. And so my parents threw parties, and I write, and sometimes I talk. But the goal is basically the same. I see myself as, in my work anyways, I just try to introduce people to one another and show them the other, and maybe get them out of themselves a little bit. So that's what I tried to do in my book, and that's what I do try to do as a journalist. So today, I really want to talk about two tribes, scientists and citizens. And now, I know that every scientist in the room is now antsy because I haven't defined my terms, and isn't science a part of citizenship? Isn't one with... I have a Venn diagram here to explain this point. This is the only day I was ever comfortable in math when they had... I think this is a Venn diagram. It might not be. Maybe the circles are supposed to be the same size. Maybe? Okay. I mentioned I failed math. So for the purposes of this discussion today, I'm citizens, scientists. The label is what you bring to water stewardship. Do you primarily come as a citizen, or do you have this stripe? Are you a scientist? I tend to use the word citizen to mean a non-specialist, but that's sort of a negative definition. It's also, I'm talking about citizens who are informed and engaged. Now, I know there's lots of citizens out there that aren't maybe informed or engaged, or they're engaged in something else. They're preoccupied and they don't have time to help out with this water thing, this environment thing. That's okay. The ones I'm talking about today do have time, and they're informed and they're engaged. And so I see them, these citizens, as people in a play, and they're an important character. And the scientists are on the list, and some of the other ones. I got a little carried away making this slide. I was sitting on the couch, I had a beer, I was watching TV, so sorry. I'm an English major, and I get wordy. Let's make that one go away. So let's start with scientists. Yeah, you guys, you girls, you scientists, you're sticklers for terminology. That's one thing that we always notice about you. You're rigorously logical. We like to tease you about that a little bit. You can be kind of literal-minded, and that's fun, and sometimes a little bit funny. That's okay, though, because I think this mode that you have of rigorous logic allows you to go really deeply into all sorts of things and understand the world literally in a deep way. Excuse me. So I think it's a little intellectually lonely, right? I know scientists, their spouses don't really know what they do. And some of them can't really pronounce what they're working on at the moment, that kind of thing. As a journalist, I've interviewed lots of scientists over the years. And it's always a little bit, it's kind of like I'm going snorkeling with somebody, except they can breathe underwater, you know? And you dive down into their discipline with them, and you hold them by the hand, and there's all these beautiful, interesting things to see in species and colorful fish, and you're going deeper and deeper. And the scientist is very excited because now there's somebody who's really paying attention to what they're doing, and they love that, and they don't really notice that I'm kind of turning blue. So then my job is to race back to the office as quick as I can and get it all down somehow before it turns to mush, and then with any luck, there'll be a story that an average citizen can read and find out a little bit about what you do. So writing about science is really a challenge for a journalist, and I'm going to come back to journalism in a little bit. So how far ahead did I skip while I was telling that story? Not too far, right? Do we need a new battery? don't want to be there yet. I want to be there. So I think when it comes to stewardship, we citizens see you scientists as these great defenders of the biosphere. We see you kind of like in a little superhero costume. I do anyway. I think that because of that intellectual discipline I talked about, that makes you fundamentally very, very trustworthy. We know that you take that real seriously, and you put a lot of faith in that, and that makes us trust you, I think. You remember the survey that they did on the CBC a few years ago where they picked the greatest Canadians of all time, and David Suzuki was I think he was number 5, but he was the top of the heap of living scientists. He was our greatest living Canadian. And I know for a fact that we wouldn't have picked him for such a high rank if he was only a journalist. Like Garth and I, he was also a scientist, and I think we fundamentally see him as trustworthy because he is a scientist. We might not agree with everything he says, but we trust him because he's a scientist. I think scientists start out seeing themselves as champions of the environment as well, especially when they're young. Like a lot of people, when they're young, they're idealistic, and they see science as a way of fixing things. They see science as a way of protecting nature. So scientists, again, from my work with you, I know that you love nature as a group. As kids, you spent all day mucking around in sloughs, and you shared your bedrooms with amphibians and reptiles and tanks. And maybe at some point you read Silent Spring or some book like that, and you got energized, and you decided you were going to get a degree and save the world. And that's great. I think that you get to a point, though, at some point, you realize that science is this wonderful system for expanding knowledge. But as a planet-saving tool, it has certain limitations. So I'd written about science a lot. And before I kind of came to this realization or had it explained to me more correctly. And it happened to me about 5 years ago when I was on this boat, which you've already seen. This is the research vessel Nemeo. It's operated on Lake Winnipeg, operated by the Lake Winnipeg Research Consortium. And I met the guy that you can just see hanging over the front rail. His name is Mike Stainton. Maybe some of you know him. There's a picture of Mike there. When I met him, he'd been at the agency at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for about 34 years. So he doesn't look that old, but he'd started really young. And I was out there to write about Lake Winnipeg's eutrophication problems, which many of you have heard about. And Mike, he was fed up with having been a government scientist working near the lake for a long time. But 3 decades going by and seeing not the kind of attention paid to it that he would have liked to have seen. So he was about to retire and he had nothing to lose, so he decided to sort of shoot his mouth off to a journalist, and I wrote it all down and wrote this Canadian Geographic article about it. And it turned out to be a pretty good story because of his generosity with information. And in the process of getting to know him, he explained to me the limitations of science for stewardship, which is really what I'm talking about, how it was limited as a tool for stewardship. And so I learned a lot in a hurry from Mike. So he explained to me that stewardship's all about data. You have to have data, and you have to have it forever. That's how we protect the biosphere. We record little numbers about how it's behaving, and we just keep them. And so we know we can see change over time. It's pretty obvious, right? Government scientists have the legal obligation and lots of programs to collect data of this kind, this monitoring data, and they do that. But it's a big biosphere, and the data network it can be pretty thin. It can be a little fragmented. There can be pieces missing. And it's the kind of thing that's very prone to funding cuts. There's a lot of programs that once existed that no longer do. We've come down, I think, from a heyday of gathering data in maybe the 70s to somewhere lower than that. So you've got gaps. We just don't have the data. That's something I've heard so many times from scientists over the years. Meanwhile, academic scientists You folks are gathering data too, but of course you're doing it for a different reason. You're out collecting data on what you're curious about. You're following research courses of inquiry, things you're curious about. You're running experiments, stuff that you just want to know. Scientists aren't paid stewards. We pay scientists to learn new stuff. And so they keep collecting data. They're not blind to the fact that data is pretty handy for stewardship. And lots of scientists find ways to keep collecting it for long periods of time. And sometimes for a whole career, and sometimes they find someone to pass the baton to, and they collect the data. But eventually it stops, and you get a gap. Even when data is gathered, it becomes fragmentary, and it can disappear into all sorts of places. It ends up on servers and disks and in filing cabinets on paper, and it's in a million pieces. And if you want to round it up and do something with it, it's very difficult to do sometimes. So there again, some gaps. But as I say, scientists overcome these problems. Scientists who want to do stewardship, they overcome their problems. They do this interesting research. They keep the data flowing. They volunteer to NGOs. They find ways in their busy lives to be stewards. But then they confront this other thing, this system that we have, that they really have no more power to change than us citizens do. So that's what I want to do right now, is look at this system that we have to manage water, to manage and safeguard water. And when scientists look at this, they get really bummed, because scientists are really good at systems. They've put every living thing into a system. They've got a name for all this, for everything, and they're really good at systems. And when they look at the one that we have to manage water, they see one that's really utterly dysfunctional and kind of illogical. So in our society, water is managed for all sorts of reasons. You can see them up here. Is the water healthy? Can I drink it? Can I make electricity with it? Can I build a casino over here? Can I water my tobacco plants? How much water do I need, by the way, for the pelicans below the weir? How much water do we need in the river to still call it a river? So that ecosystem dimension to water, it's last on the list. And I think maybe right now that is literally where it is. There's a lot of wants and needs to do with water, and there are agencies to deal with all of these wants and needs in a way. We've got many, many agencies, and the trouble is we have no central clearinghouse. We have no mechanism to sort among them and to deal with the inevitable conflicts of use that come up. So politically, too, we've got this puzzle of many pieces. In this region, for example, that we're sitting in, we're in the Lake Winnipeg watershed, as many of you know, and it's big. You can see it goes from the Rockies almost to Lake Superior. There's 4 provinces, there's 4 American states, I believe, and 2 countries. That's the thing about water, because it, of course, ignores all our petty little political boundaries, and it goes just where it wants to. So we've got this tangle of agencies, and they compete with each other vertically and laterally for administration over water. And sometimes they'll double manage one aspect, and other aspects they'll not manage at all, and they'll kind of fall through the cracks. Some people say that Lake Winnipeg in its entirety fell through administrative cracks. So, and then if water goes across an international boundary, of course, you've got to double all this layer cake of management by 2, more or less. Scientists, again, know all about this problem. They call it jurisdictional fragmentation and things like that. That's what it is. Water managers, the people that actually work in the system, people that actually manage water, they know about this problem, and they've been calling for years for a new kind of system, something more sensible, something based on whole watersheds. Should be some sort of management authority for the whole thing. Seems very sensible to me. I'll throw that out there. But whether it is or it isn't, we haven't investigated that very far. Getting to that is like pushing water uphill. We still have no way of integrating and rationalizing water governance in Canada. We have no national water policy in this country defined by water to guide all this profusion of agencies. How elected people use science is still a mystery to me. I've been asking scientists this for years, and I've never really gotten a satisfactory answer. I know that scientists get invited to the Capitol and they give talks to parliamentary committees, and they have breakfast with senators and stuff and talk about water or what have you. How any of that really makes it into the running of the country, I'm not too sure. And that's the thing, it's a democracy after all. We should be sure about stuff like that, and I don't think too many people really know about how that works. It's very confusing. And I think politicians mostly ignore science for a very simple reason. It's confusing to them too, and there's no votes for them either way. And until we as citizens force them to come up with a better system, a more rational one that presents them with clear policy alternatives so they can make decisions that we can trace back to them, they're going to continue to ignore it, I think. I'm also not a political scientist, but that seems kind of clear to me as well. So let's flip it around now and look at all this stuff from the citizen's point of view. Scientists see this Tower of Babel as, from the neighborhood level. The citizen, I think, looks out and they see a great throng of experts. Everybody is really smart, but them, but us. All these people are in charge of water, and they must know what they're doing, right? They sound like they do, and they mean well. And even if we as citizens do learn about jurisdictional fragmentation or the confusion or what have you, we still feel small and ineffective because we're not experts in this. We're a culture of experts, and we're not. And even if we want to change the system, well, the scientists have asked to change the system, and there hasn't been a response. So why should average citizens be any more successful? I think that we will be successful. It's our participation in that. We have to demand alongside the scientists, and then we will be successful. I think we need to just bring the right attitude to it. We need some attitude. I've been hanging around in New York lately, and they got a lot of attitude down there. If you walk down the street in New York, you can tell a New Yorker 3 blocks ahead or 50 yards ahead, because you can't really see 3 blocks ahead, and they claim their space on the sidewalk. They let you know, this is my city, it's a great city, and what makes it great is me personally. And I like that. I like the way they own it, and the way they feel a sense of ownership of whatever magic that is there. I think we need to do stuff like that ourselves more. I think the first step in stewardship is showing some that attitude and remembering that informed citizens still run the show. It's a democracy after all. It may be sluggish, it might be broken here and there, but it's still a democracy, and informed people still run the show. If the machinery of water management isn't working for us, then let's get a new one. Let's fix it. If it's suppressing science instead of maximizing science, well, let's fix that, because this is a technologically adept society. We're reaping all sorts of technological benefits, the cameras and the computers and all this stuff. We should have the best technology managing the biosphere as well. And this thing about expertise too, feeling less inferior about that is, I think, something that we all have to do as individual citizens. We're not scientists, but we're still experts in another sense. And I think that sense is our relationship to land and water. And this is really at the heart of my Lakeland project. Your relationship with nature makes you an expert. It makes you an authority in your own right. And the longer and deeper your relationship with nature, the more of an expert you are. And I think this is just a brilliant and revolutionary idea. And of course, it's not mine. I got it from this guy. And some of you will have met Stan Rowe. I never had the pleasure. He was on faculty on this campus for almost 2 decades, I think. You may have read his book called Home Place. And this idea I'm talking about this authority we get directly from our relationship with nature. He calls it home place in the title of his book. And I think it's one of the great notions of the world. I put it right up there with Medicare. It's a great Saskatchewan invention. To simplify him a little bit, I think Stan Rowe was saying that stewardship of nature depends on people paying close attention to it over the course of a lifetime. Whether you're a citizen or a scientist, the longer you're attached to some particular piece of nature, the better you're going to understand it. A newcomer parachuting in is going to have difficulties that you yourself won't have. And of course, you can't really care about nature enough to protect it unless you have a relationship, right? It is a relationship. It's a long-term one. A lot of our best nature writing is built on this foundation. Henry Thoreau, Edward Abbey, Aldo Leopold, names like that are influential for me. Margaret Atwood, I think she's a great nature writer. She's not seen that way many times, or oftentimes. Trevor Harriott, closer to home. Courtney Milne, the nature photographer here in Saskatoon, he passed away recently, and he literally spent his last years in his own backyard because his illness kept him there, looking at nature in that very narrow sense, and it may turn out to be his most profound work. That, I think we need to really celebrate that. Scientists are the brain of environmental stewardship, but citizens who are passionately connected to nature, they're the heart of stewardship, and we need them both. We need them both working together and finding their commonalities. So I tried to follow all these examples of these bright folks in working on my book, Lakeland. And I'm going to try to show you the book in 4 slides, because there's an element of it that's quite visual, I think. My book started from the simple observation that I made on the shore of the lake where my family has a cabin. And I'd noticed that there were changes in my lifetime, and if I sort of reached back in time through my parents' and grandparents' memories, that these changes were really visible, and you can see them here. That's a resort property in about the middle of the 30s. And that would be about the youth of my parents. And that little red one in the middle, that's our cabin. That's what you saw there in my youth. I was very, very young then. And then in my children's youth, it looked about like that, 30 years later. And, all these owners were doing the same thing. They were out seeking a relationship with nature, but the way they were going about it was starting to morph and change. And the process continues. This one is 2005, as you can see, and here's one from last fall. This one, I like this slide because on the left, of course, we've got the 2000, well, you can guess which is the 2009, and the other one is about 1950. So you can really see this dramatic juxtaposition of what? A change in values. Something had changed there. In my own backyard, while I was out there trying to commune with nature and acquire a relationship with it, which is never easy, there were people buying properties like this in the RM of Lakeland, and 3 weeks later, having them look like that. And I really still have a hard time getting my mind around that. And so I wanted to go around the countryside and look and see, is just, maybe everyone just in my little RM is crazy, and everyone else is much more sensible. So one thing led to another, and I went all over Canada writing about lakes and looking at them. And anyway, that's Lakeland. If you have more questions about that, the book's here, and I can talk to you more about that after. When the book came out, though, this well-known lake scientist, David Schindler, who you probably know, he's agreed to review it for a magazine, and I got kind of worried because I thought, well, he's a real scientist, and I thought he might find my so-called research, not deep or insufficient somehow. But he gave the book a really positive review, and he said one thing that really made me float on air, though. He said that by paying careful attention to nature, the average person could reach a lot of the same conclusions as a professional scientist. So I was really encouraged by that. I'm not trying to say that citizens are somehow the equal or the equivalent of scientists, professional scientists, or that we're trying to replace you, or we're trying to subvert you, or that we're here to tell you how to do your job. Not at all. It's just much more simply that from our separate perspectives, we can reach a lot of the same conclusions. We see things similarly. We're natural allies. And we need to work together, because when I look around at the landscape of who wants to do stewardship, I see scientists there. Their hands are up, and I know mine's up. We're about it, so we should work together as much as we possibly can. So what can we do? Let me get rid of that slide too. That's better. I think we can start with communication and telling the truth about our water governance system or lack of system. It's dysfunctional, so we should call it what it is. Scientists, you know all about this problem, so just spread the word, say it. So lots of you write blogs about what you do. Consider posting on that topic once in a while. Just tell people at parties. One little conversation can have a nice ripple effect. Speaking of spreading the word, you'd think that the science media would want to tell this story. And there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't seem to happen. I mentioned we live in this really technologically aware society. We love technology. We find it entertaining. And shows like Daily Planet, and this is started in 2002, I think, whole hour a day. And you can almost literally, or virtually anyway, follow scientists into their labs and really watch them work. We love that stuff. Web-based outlets let you drill down and down and down, and you learn more. I think the details of science are good video, and they're entertaining. But I think we lose the truth of science in some of that stuff. And I know that Jay Ingram here would be the first to agree with that. I've read some of the stuff he's written on the topic. It might not make good TV, but it's an important topic, and we have to figure out a way to spread that word. I think working scientists can help with the communications effort. I mentioned spreading the word in whatever your networks and your circles. Citizens, I think they need to do it too. I think we need to show some support for that, learn the truth of that, and make politicians at any rate aware of it. I think we need to show some attitude. Citizens are going to have to put some new planks in election platforms. I know there's candidates in the city that have asked who I'm voting for, and the next time we do this, and I'm going to want to know if my candidate knows about this jurisdictional fragmentation problem to do with water. I'm going to need to know that. I think we citizens have to partner with scientists to make up our minds, and then we have to present a manifesto for what we want. We're not going to get there, I think, by recycling bottles and turning off the tap while we're brushing our teeth. Those things are sure they're important, but we need to rethink on the system of governance. This is just me saying this now, but here's a scenario for what we could have as a system of water governance. We need administrative boundaries that follow Mother Nature. We need whole watersheds. That's what scientists think. I think that's a good idea. Let's explore that as far as it goes. We need a full commitment to data for stewardship. It has to be sufficient data in kind and quantity to do its job. We need it forever. With the biosphere, unless we're only going to use the biosphere for a while, we need this data forever. Let's just face that fact and get it done. The universal access to data, I think, is a bit like universal access to healthcare, something we kind of take for granted and demand. Why can't we have the same? Any public corporation in the city, if I want to know their finances, I can go and get their balance sheet. I can read their financial statements, and I can know exactly what's going on, or I should be able to. And for the most part, you can. You can't do that with ecosystems. We need something similar. We need a rational framework for agencies, a clearinghouse, some way of sorting out all that confusion. We need science to be the law, I think. So scientists have asked elected people for this stuff already. I think citizens are just beginning to. Let's ask together, and maybe people will listen. There's citizen science groups out there that are way ahead. They're doing this already. I mentioned the Nemeo on Lake Winnipeg. This is a citizen science group. They have government funding, but it's ultimately a citizens initiative partnering with science. There's lots of examples, and I'm going to skip a little bit past them because time is running short. But some of you may be aware of some of these places. These folks on Lake of the Woods are doing excellent work. They're in that little magazine at the bottom. They're actually publishing scientific results, watered down for a lay audience, but they're publishing the results of serious study in a little magazine for cottagers. I think it's kind of cool. Last example I want to close with, I ran across this one this summer. These folks with a really long name to be stewards of a really long river, the Yukon River, starts in Canada, goes into Alaska all the way to the Bering Sea. About 70 First Nations. And being First Nations people, they've just very sensibly decided to ignore the international border. I like that attitude. I think that's a really good idea, ignoring borders. They just had the nerve to do it. They have seen that it's one river and one people in a watershed, not two countries. So that's pretty nice. Harvard University has picked these folks as a model of water stewardship and governance. And they use science. If you want to know what their science is, you can just go to their website and find out their field procedures and look at their field manuals. And if you want to see their data, it's there. It's just a link right at the top of the website. But again, I think it's the citizen component to organizations like this that's really important, because it's as citizens that they define their goal, and it's simple and elegant, and I think it's kind of beautiful. This is what they're after. It's a real citizen's point of view. It makes perfect sense to see things in simple terms like that when we're dealing with something as elemental as water. So I want to thank the University of Saskatchewan and Catherine and Howard for the invitation, and Kate for figuring out how to get me here. I really appreciate you throwing open the door to unruly citizen input today. I'm at the back. I've got my book here, but really I'm here as a citizen who cares about water stewardship. So I guess there's going to be some questions. If there's any tricky ones, I'm going to just bounce them right back. I see some scientists. Maybe they'll answer them instead. Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Allan. As Allan mentioned, we do have a few moments for questions and answers. Now, we don't have a floor microphone, so what I'd ask you to do is just use your outside voice, and then I'll try to repeat the question for the videotape. So,
Well, right now the EPA Scientists Union is demanding a halt, saying that the phosphate fertilizer industry is using the municipal water supply as a toxic dump. Fluoride levels in rivers and ocean outlets can be quite high, and actually to the point where they actually damage fish populations and interfere with breeding. And most people are unaware of this, and those that are feel that they're branded as kind of crazies or something. But yet there are thousands of scientists who are actually in a revolt against their own employer, demanding action be taken.
Yeah, as a citizen, the problem of scientists disagreeing with one another is a really big problem. It's just, oh no, the longer scientists, if you set them up as little warriors against one another, it's great for the status quo, isn't it? The longer they argue, or are seen to argue, even if they're not really arguing, the better. For me, it just comes back to a clear system of water governance. We need something that's streamlined and clear to do stewardship. If working scientists want to argue it out in the journals on the periphery of their craft and the art end of things, then go for it. But in terms of really being stewards, I think we have a lot of science that we could use right now to do very practical and good things. We're not doing a lot of basic things, if that makes any sense. A lot of the arguments are a little bit nebulous, and meanwhile the practicalities aren't getting dealt with.
Okay, if I can put that into a sentence, how do we encourage farmers to be stewards of water, and perhaps what's our shared responsibility for agricultural runoff? Is that fair?
See, I thought up an answer for a different question that I thought you were asking. It seemed to me you were talking about blame, and finger pointing is emblematic of all these problems. There's farmers get blamed for a certain set of things. People that leave big wakes behind boats and get blamed for things. Ignorant city people get blamed for things because they've never had to dig a well and actually get water. They just turn on the tap and it comes. People blame all the time. And again, I think that a better system of water governance that anticipated some of these conflicts would sort that out. It would go a long way to helping that. We don't have a system, so we're reduced to finger pointing too often because there's no clearinghouse for these inevitable conflicts.
Yes, sir.
Allan, great presentation.
Thank you.
A bunch of questions I could ask, but let me just ask this one. What do you think about privatization of water?
I think everybody heard that one. Privatization of water?
It's often touted as a solution to some of these challenges, but in practice it looks like just the opposite. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, I'm just going to be really bluntly honest and say I have no idea. I think on the face of it, privatization of something that seems to me intrinsic to citizenship is a scary thought. I'm kind of a socialist, you know. I don't think it's a good idea. But I want to emphasize that my mind is wide open, and we've got all these clever people who are going to partner up with social scientists to answer a lot of these questions. I think we need to go to first principles. We need to be open to everything. Because the one thing that I know that doesn't work is our present system. So maybe there's some role of privatization. My gut's against it, but let's not go on gut. Let's go on. Let's do some study of that and see how that could fit in.
Howard Rita from university here. Maybe I could just comment on that. So I'm the new boy from Europe, right? And the UK has a privatised water industry, which is regulated in different ways. And one of the features about managing water in Europe is that the environment is right at the top of the list of priorities for water managers. So we may have a private industry, but they're regulated, and they basically have to satisfy the governance model, which is decreed at the European level, that ecosystem quality is the top of the constraints. I'd really just like to add a sort of personal vote of thanks to Allan for his comments here, because I think he's absolutely right on. And coming to Canada, I see a lot of science challenges about the way in which the climate and the land are changing, and about the water quality in our systems, and how to manage very complex issues like natural resource development of the oil sands. But I think the biggest challenges are really all in the governance area. We do have incredibly fragmented governance, and there really is a major challenge for all of us as to how to steer our way through that. And scientists aren't really very good at that. They like working on their narrow issues. And in fact, scientists have to be very careful, because if we stray too far from our remit, then we run the danger of losing our credibility. So I think we're looking to people like Allan to make the case. And there are some very encouraging signs around. So in the fall last year, I went down to Regina, and there was a meeting led by Ducks Unlimited and the Association of Saskatchewan Watersheds. So these are grassroots people concerned about their environment, and they were saying, look, we need a water strategy for the province. How do we take it forward? So I think there is tremendous power there, and people are mobilising around local places, and the role of science is really to help us facilitate that process, among other things.
Perhaps I'll take advantage of having a microphone and make my question the last. I wanted to ask you, Allan, while I was listening to your talk, I mean, clearly there was a need for this synergy of the concerned citizen and the scientist. But at the same time, what we're seeing going on in North America, particularly in the United States, but more here, is a developing almost anti-science, almost anti-intellectual constituency. And in my experience as a journalist, quite often I see that the people who are most passionate about a topic are the most passionate in rejecting data that doesn't fit their passion, if you know what I mean. I wonder if you could just address that. How do these people as scientists and engaged citizens overcome this sort of, you know, social volcano of anti-intellectualism?
Social volcano of anti-intellectualism. I'm just really trying to get my mind around that, because I know what you're saying. You know, and that's a real trouble. That's a real problem for working scientists. This ignorant points of view drive them crazy. I know that all you scientists go to parties now and again, since party is our theme for the day, and somebody gets a couple of pints in them and tells you that you don't know what you're talking about, that climate change is stupid or whatever. I don't know what to say about narrow points of view, except that they're always going to be out there. But people with narrow points of view didn't come today. I'm just really talking about the people that are here. And we're all going to, people that have broader points of view and more inclusive ones are always going to have to shoulder that. That's a bit of a load that they carry. And also the shrillness of the debate or its combative nature, I think we have to really, I could have done a whole hour, which I'd really be qualified to do, about the role of journalism, our profession, because I'm a journalist, that's my trade. And I know that anyone who's my age in it or older has seen the scope of debate shrink. The newspaper that we read today is physically about 2/3 the size of the newspaper that we read in 1985. I could just show you that. The debate has shrunk. So journalists play a role. I think that, it's just that. We have to let the light shine on where it's brightest, kind of thing. And, you know, people say all this stuff is really difficult and hard, and you know, it's too hard to work out this stuff. It's too confusing, too many agencies, too many wants and needs. I think that's just utter nonsense. We've done some really complex, tricky things in this young society. We've invented social welfare in the middle of the Great Depression and then had a war as a kind of a follow-up to that. And we've had one culture override another with nearly disastrous results, and that culture that was formerly overridden is now in the resurgent. That's a big challenge in a society, and we've done that. We've figured out an education system that we can all agree on. And I used to go to a parent-run school. If you want to see people disagree, get them talking about what's the right education for their children. But we somehow figured that out. It's not a perfect system. I don't think this water challenge thing is that hard. I really don't. I think we just have to stop being so tense about it and get on with it. We have fretted ourselves into inaction. I'm a very practical-minded person. I look around the room, I know we've got all the tools that we need to do this. People just need to let go a little bit and think. Maybe a guy like me has to think about private water. I don't know. We've all just got to let go a little bit and open up to other points of view, and I think it'll sort itself out. Naively, hopefully stated.